In this lecture, we're going to see how you can use the Context Object API to expose the properties of your C++ object to QML. The Context Object API is pretty similar to what we've been doing with context properties. The only difference is that it allows you to expose a bunch of properties together in one go. We're going to go to Qt Creator and play with this. Here we are in Qt Creator. We're going to create our project as usual. It's a Qt Quick application. We call it Context Object Demo. Save it in a location on our drive. We choose the Qt version. We choose our kit and finish. The first thing we want to do is come to the main CPP file here, import QQML context. You already know that. This is our chief weapon. And we want to create two strings that we want to expose to QML. One is going to be the last name, the other is going to be the first name. How creative. We're going to say QString last name. It's going to be do. QString first name. It's going to be John. And we're going to expose these to QML using the context properties. We are going to first expose with context properties, and then we're going to wrap all this together in a context object and expose all this in one go. It's pretty easy. So we're going to say engine root context set context. And even here you see that we have set context, but we're not going to use this just yet. We're going to wait in a minute. We're going to say m last name, and it's going to be, we use q variant from value and pass in the last name. We're going to do the same thing for the first name, engine root context set context property. We're going to say m first name. And just like this, these values are available in QML. Okay, to use these values in QML, we're going to have to put in a few components. First, we're going to change the title here to Context Object Demo, because that's what we're doing here. And we're going to put a rectangle component. Inside, we're going to put a text component. The ID is going to be mText. This is good. We're going to give it a value of m last name. You see that it is available in autocomplete. We want to make the text a little bigger, so we're going to say font, point size. Let's make it a 20. We're going to see how this looks. We want to give the rectangle a few properties. The ID is going to be mrect1. Let's give the text here a 1 too, so that it is descriptive. The width of the rectangle is going to be the implicit width of the text component here plus some margin. So we're going to say mtext1 implicit width. Let's add 20. We're going to see how this looks. The height is going to be mtext1 implicit height plus 10. Let's change this to a plus 2. The color is going to be beige. I love beige. You probably know that already if you have watched one of my previous tutorials. And the border, we want a border. It's going to be yellow, green. Okay, let's run this and see how it looks. We should have a rectangle with the last name inside, and you see here we have a do inside. We should center this. I love my things to be centered, so we're going to say anchor center in parent here. Very easy to do in QML. This is better. We should do one also for the first name. We're going to copy this completely and change a few things. This is the beauty of QML. You can copy and paste and adapt in a minute. This should be mtext2 as well, and mrect2 here. And this is going to say M first name. And we should have Doe John. We are only seeing John because these two rectangles are overlapping. We want to move the second one to the right of the first one. The way we do that, we use encores. If you know a little bit about QML, you already know this. So we're going to say encores left equals mrect1 right. Should be to the right of the first rectangle. And we're going to add a left margin so that we have some spaces between the two rectangles. So we're going to say encores left margin. And we're going to make this a 5. Let's see how this looks. We should have Doe John. Okay, this is better. Now you see that you can expose the properties from C++ and use them in your QML files. This is nothing new because you learned all this in a previous lecture. Now we want to use the context object to expose these properties. So the way context objects work, you define a C++ class and you wrap all your properties that you want to expose to QML in that class. And what you expose to QML is the object of that class, and the properties of that class are going to be automatically available to QML. I know this is a mouthful, so we're going to do this and you're going to understand. The first thing we need to do is to create a C++ class. So we should create it, add new C++ class. We're going to call this property wrapper. It's going to inherit Q object. And we are going to expose our properties as Q properties. So we're going to say Q property here. You already know how to do this. This is going to be a Q string, and it's going to be last name. We are going to create another one for the first name, Q property. The type is going to be Q string, and it's going to be first name, all lowercase. I love lowercase when I expose my properties like this. I don't know your preference. You can put in whatever you like. Now what we want to do is to add a private section to the class, which is going to contain the fields for these Q properties. We're going to generate all the methods that are needed. You already know how to do this, but this is a good chance to practice. We have setter, getter, a signal, and a field here. For the first name, we're going to do the same thing. And here we are. The field is here. I want to move these methods in the CPP file. I'm going to refactor and move definition to the CPP file. I'm going to repeat the same steps for the remaining methods. Set first name, move to the CPP file. Set last name, move to the CPP file. What else do we have here? I want to move these public slots to be public functions. Again, this is a matter of preference. You can leave them there if you want. So now that we have the class, we can go back to the main CPP file, include it. Property wrapper. We can comment out our strings here. So I'm going to do a block comment. And I'm going to create a property wrapper object, call it wrapper. I'm going to comment this out again because we're not using context properties anymore. And I'm going to say engine root context set context object, and I'm going to pass in the address of the object here. You see that it wants a pointer, so we're going to give it the address of our object here. We're going to say pound symbol and prop wrapper. This will do. Now, I want you to notice that the names we gave to our properties, we're going to use this name here to get the properties. So we go to QML and change M last name to last name and change M first name to first name, because that's what we are using now. The names for the properties are coming from here again. Last name, first name, last name, first name. That's what we should use in QML to read the properties. Let's run the application and see that it behaves the same. And you see that we have nothing in here. Why is that? We didn't set the last name and the first name. One way to set them is to use the initializer list. We can come back to the class definition here, go back in the CPP file, and initialize M first name and M last name. So we're going to say M last name. We make this say last name, and M first name say first name, just like this. If we run, we're going to see last name and first name in QML, because these are the initializer values. To have some values inside, we want to actually set the values when we instantiate the object in main CPP. That's the way I like to do things. I think it's more explicit and easier to understand. You are free to do it however you want. I'm going to say prop wrapper here. Set last name, do. Prop wrapper, set first name, John. And if I run now, I should see do John. Okay, this is what we want. We are seeing our values in QML, and we are exposing the entire object. I want you to notice that in main CPP, we exposed the entire object of prop wrapper, and everything we had inside here exposed as a Q property is going to be directly available in QML. Last name, first name, we are directly using them without saying anything like a CPP class. The same thing we used to do with context properties. We don't need to do this right here because the properties are directly available in the context. Okay, you can use them directly in your QML as long as you have the object that contains them exposed in the main CPP file like this. Okay, now that you know this, how is this different from exposing your properties as context properties the way we did before? For one, all your properties are exposed in one go. So you have one place where you can manage all your properties. The other thing is that you can have updates to these properties automatically propagated to QML. So let's say that in the CPP file of the class, you have some logic that updates the last name or the first name. The changes are going to be automatically propagated to QML, and you don't need to take any additional step. If you were using context properties to expose your properties, you would have to manually reset the context property to have the changes reflected in QML. To show this off, I am going to add a few things to our class here. I am going to import a timer, QTimer, and this is a class that allows you to do things periodically. You're going to see this in a moment if you don't know the class already. We're going to create a field in the class. The type is going to be QTimer. It's going to be a pointer. Let's call it mTimer. Follow the same naming convention here. Oh, we messed this up a little bit. Okay, we have the instance here. I also want to add an integer and call it mRandomNumber, because we are going to generate random numbers in a given range and then use those random numbers to give random names to the first name or the last name. You're going to see this in a moment. So we want to come to the CPP file and say mTimer. We want to initialize this. We're going to say new QTimer and give it a parent of this. We also want to initialize mRandomNumber to 0. This will do. I want to include two headers that are going to help us with generating random numbers. We are going to initialize the seed for the random numbers. So we should say srand. I am going to create a string list, and the list is going to contain a bunch of last names. Control A, Control I to align. Now what I want to do, I want to connect to the timeout signal of the timer and do something every time it times out. The way I do that, I say connect mtimer. I'm going to say # qtimer timeout. This is the signal I want to use. I am going to use the lambda function notation for the signal slot notation here, my parameter list and my body. And I'm going to put a semicolon to end my statement here. Every time the timer times out, I want to generate a random number, and I generate it like this. And I want to select a random name from the list here and assign that to the first name of my class here. So I'm going to say set first name, because these methods were automatically generated when I created the missing methods for the Q properties, if you remember. And I'm going to say list random number. It's going to be the list item at the index of random number. And if you look here, the random number we generate is going to be between 0 and list size -1. Okay, this is what we're going to have here. So we're basically going to span the entire list, because this list starts to be indexed at 0. You probably know all this already. Okay, now that we have the body of the lambda function ready, we should say mtimer start. And we want to trigger the timer every 3 seconds. So we put in 3000 for 3 seconds. And we can try and run the application and see what we get. But before we do that, I want you to think about what you're going to see. So what we are doing, we are starting a timer that times out every 3 seconds. And when it times out, we generate a random number, and we set the first name to be a random name inside this list here. So it may be Johansson, Kevin, Matheson, whatever. You're going to see this. Let's run the application. We have Do John, Do Kevin, Do Johansson. It is changing every 3 seconds. If you want to change it a little faster, you can make this 1 second. Why not? Let's run again. Okay, you see that it is changing. And I want to bring to your attention that all of this is happening from C++. What we basically have is a class that is automatically updating the first name here. And this is a good thing you get from exposing your data wrapped in an object like this. Okay, now that you have this, I think it's a good idea to go back to the documentation and try to visit the QQML context class. We visit it again. You can type the class name here, and it's going to come up. If you go to more, it says context allow data to be exposed to the QML components instantiated by the QML engine. And if you go down here, they show you that you can expose your data as a context property. And down here, they also show you that you can expose as a context object. And they do exactly what we've been doing in this course. So I just want you to know that these are 2 ways you have now to expose your data to QML. And context objects can come in handy sometimes, but I find myself leaning towards context properties because that's better for me. But you're going to see what works for you as you work with these things for a long time. Okay, this is all I had for this lecture. In the next lecture, we're going to see how you can call a JavaScript function from C++. I'll see you in the next lecture.